Gracias. I speak Spanish sometimes because I'm moving to California. Santa Cruz. Whew. So stoked. And I also love gracias because it has the word grace in it. It's such a beautiful way of saying thank you. So gracias. How's the festival? Freaking awesome. Thank you for coming. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Karina, for making this all happen. Every kind of lecture or talk or yoga class I've ever done has always started with the 8 limbs of yoga. Now, the 8 limbs of yoga, as Patanjali describes them, is kind of a little complicated, but the Blissology 8 limbs are much easier. So I see Isabel here in the front here. This woman has made a lot of this festival happen. Originally from Montreal, now living in Brooklyn. Stand up here for a sec, Isabel. And speaking in Spanish, let's see if we can count how many limbs she has. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 8-limbed yoga path I'm trying to prescribe is if I take my 4 limbs and wrap them around her 4 limbs. That, no legs, no leg wrapping yet. That is our 8-limb yoga path. So can we stand up, wrap your arms around a beautiful yogi or yogini or fellow human being. This is what we're talking about here. Thanks, Isabel. Yeah. Give me some too. Oh, good. Okay. Thanks, everyone. That's all I got for you. Let's go ride some mountain bikes and do it Whistler style now. We're talking about love. I've been thinking about this my whole damn life, like, what is love? I've also been thinking about another question that's, I don't know if you've ever, heard about the invisible hand theory, but it's basically when you look back on your life in a certain time, you realize there's been this invisible hand that's been pushing you the whole time. My hero, Joseph Campbell, talks about this a lot. But as I look back at my life, at the trajectory of where I've come from, really, I understand it more as I've been trying to answer a second question besides what is love, and that is, what exactly happens when we get quiet and present in the beauty of nature? I mean, I grew up in a small town in Ontario by a lake. I spent a lot of time out there by the lake, and I feel like that completely informed my sensibility. It's interesting because I am married to someone from Bombay, India, where yoga comes from in India. And it's so crazy to me to see how many people, not just in that city, but around the world, will never, in their whole life, have their feet on grass or a beach. And I'm not just talking about poor people in the slums. Like now the middle class there is so big that they're all wearing dress shoes all the time, and the trees are mostly gone. And I look at how this kind of trend is happening as we urbify the world, as we make it more urban. I don't know if you know this, but in 1996, we made a big change where all of a sudden over half the world now lives in cities. So now people grow up with so much light pollution. I was in Hong Kong recently, and I keep remembering something a teacher of mine, Tom Meyer, said, and that is, we've created a world where people are more concerned with Prada than we are with prana. And I see that so often, and I feel like that statement is deeper than we think. To me, I look at it this way, and I mentioned this in class the other day, and I told people who came to our class about Earth Body Yoga, about how yoga is connected to nature, that we'd continue our talk here in a deeper way. And I look at it this way. I love People magazine, and I was mentioning that is not the People magazine from Australia. That's a porn magazine, just so you know, if you're Australian. People magazine is called Who magazine down there. I learned that the hard way. I was talking about People magazine, and people were like, love is the ultimate renewable resource, huh? Anyhow, Tantra. I'm trying to get my wife to practice tantric shopping, by the way. Do you know what that is? It's where you look in the windows for 4 hours, but you don't buy anything. So, anyhow, I'm talking about People Magazine. Like, we are so obsessed with People Magazine all the time. Like, you can't sell a product in this country unless it is endorsed by a celebrity. I mean, we are so obsessed by the stars in Hollywood, and in the process, we've kind of created a world where we call it normal to forget about the grandeur of the stars in the sky. And I think that's really sad, like where we're going. That's why it's so cool we're doing here at Wanderlust. I mean, people who are organizing that, thank you. It's such a cool mission to bring yoga, like literally out here into the trees. Because if you've never been to other yoga festivals, I mean, sometimes I end up teaching in conference centers, big, huge, like 4,000 square foot rooms. And they're 2 floors below street level. And I'm trying to tell people about prana and about health. And I'm just like, wow, if you really want to be healthy, like get to the nearest park and sit under a tree as soon as you possibly can. Because the legs behind your head and everything is nice, but really, I really truly believe that yoga is the second most healthy thing we can do. The healthiest thing is to have an intimate relationship with nature. And people say all the time, oh, I loved your class, this, that, but I cannot take any credit for anything I ever do because everything I do is kind of a transmission of what I've received out in the beauty of nature. It is. When I spend a long time in cities, I feel like I lose my superpowers. It's this quietness that happens out there in nature where everything happens. And again, this is how the Buddha reached enlightenment. Didn't he? He just sat under a tree until he got it. And then now if you go to that tree, it's like a temple. And there's all these images. And the Buddha's like, I don't want images about me, but it became that. And I think as yogis, our work is really to take the original teachings about sitting and getting quiet under a tree and bring it back to the trees. You know, as we're doing our tree pose, to like really do tree pose. Every breath is tree pose because we're like interacting with the trees. And in my process of kind of understanding what happens when I get quiet and present out in nature, I realized that I'm answering the same question, what is love? Because maybe I'll ask you as a question, here I'm asking you guys now, what happens to you when you end up alone on the mountaintop, not on Instagram, not tweeting your friend, oh my God, check out the sunset, not doing a selfie, but actually like there, that moment where you take your breath away. Throw me out some adjectives. Grounding, sure. Like, and look at that word grounding. I mean, grounding. We are like, this is it, bringing spirituality down to earth. A few more. Peace. Remembering what? Who you are. It's so good you say that, actually. I see Sean here, and he's been going through some trademark stuff. And people think the bliss business is all meditating and chai tea drinking, but man, I just went through a 4.5-year trademark lawsuit. $80,000. Like buying a Volvo, driving off a cliff. I was saying it's like having a sand mandala like the Tibetans have. They just make the sand mandala and dump it into the rivers. Everything is impermanent, but I'm learning this one through other ways also. And this is it, is like through that process, I'm just talking to her point when she said she remembered who she is like, I kind of forget who I am. Like this week was heavy because we actually just finally signed an agreement. And, you know, here I am teaching at a festival and I have to give out so much of my energy, and I've gone through this like scrambling thing, been awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, just, and it's only by getting out into the trees that I remembered, like exactly, I said exactly those statements when I got out here in the forest. I'm like, this is who I am. This is really, truly who I am. So thank you for saying that. One more. What else do you feel out there? Elevated. Who said that? Yeah, okay, go ahead. Oh, you are elevated. No wonder, okay. So out of the day-to-day and into some other realm. I love it. I think about the word presence a lot. Like, have you ever looked at the word presence and that it has two meanings? One is you become very quiet and with a certain person or thing or experience. And the other meaning of presence is like there's this invisible force behind something that you tune into. And the cool thing about nature, when we get quiet and present out in nature, we open up to this presence and it elevates us. I think what elevates us most is a sense of reverence. And I don't think we use reverence enough in modern living anymore. So this year I actually looked up reverence on Wikipedia. And something stood out, with just like neon light stood out at me. And it said, reverence is increasing one's receptivity for greatness. And I'm like, that is just it, is when we are out in nature, we are elevated, and we are, spiritually, physically elevated, so we are open to this greatness that comes out of us. Now, this presence that we're talking about in nature, like, if we were talking about this maybe 100, 150 years ago, we might call it God. Well, who believes in God? Okay, fair number of people, maybe less than half, but almost there. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah, how do you define God, right? It's so hard. It's so hard. It's like I think about this one all the freaking time. Like, what is God? And you know what? I've answered the question. I think the thing about our generation, and particularly this demographic here of everyone in Wanderlust, is there's kind of two statements that mean a lot to us. And one is like, love is my religion. God is love. And I guess the third one I'm trying to link together here is like, do you know this one by Frank Lloyd Wright? He said that I believe in God, I just spell it nature. Right? And that's kind of it, is like for our generation, is like I feel like a lot of people are kind of swapping out God for nature. Like we say grace every night, but I have a 3-year-old, he's my teacher. You know, I do yoga to be half as happy as a 3-year-old, because as humans, we can only get that elevated when we're on mushrooms, when we're like totally tripping out. Like, these guys have a kid. I know, like I was saying this the other day in class, but what I've learned about a kid so far is like from year 0 to year 1, they are like your best friend, but your best friend really drunk, just kind of like stumbling around on the furniture. And, and then from year 1 to year 2, they're like your best friend, but like on mushrooms. Like, check it out, Dad, the moon. Oh my God, the stars. Who cares about People magazine? Put that thing down, Dad. Put it down. Look at the stars. And this is we can only get there when we're chemically enhanced. And and I think the kids are so open to this God force naturally. And no matter what it is, see, this is it, is when we are open to this experience, in our modern living, we're either like, we have the option of being atheist, where you don't believe in anything, or you have the ability of being religious or spiritual. To me, I was really happy when I found out about the movement called Possibilitarianism. Does anyone know this movement? It basically says, okay, in between atheism and spirituality and religion, there's a third choice in the middle, and it's called possibilitarianism. So when you open to that presence out there in the forest or on top of the mountain, it could just be you increasing your oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin, as you will learn in Psychology 101 class. Or there could be this invisible force out there that somehow informs the spirit and opens us up to something, and we go, oh my God, gracias, thank you. And we're talking on a radio, and there could be someone listening on the other end, or there could be no one. And possibilitarianism says both possibilities are good. And let's get out there on the mountaintops as often as possible. Let's really open our hearts to the presence that's there and I don't know if we will ever know for sure in our lifetime which one of these truths is valid, but you know what? They're both awesome. So let's choose both. And here's where I want to go with this, is that another thing that happens really is when we get out in nature and super present, we feel so small. Don't you feel small? Like, the sunset's so big. The ocean is so incredibly big. I mean, I say it all the time. For me, I talk about the ocean as my temple. I say the ocean is a shrine of interconnection and worship there often. And in the process of getting out there, you're going to feel really small. And what you'll realize when you do this is what the yogis wanted us to feel. Yoga is like this systematic crushing of the ego, of going, actually, it's like this. The ego blinds us to other people, to the namaste, the connection to other people, and love binds us to other people, to other places, to other things. And we need to really connect them in together. And so when we feel small, we kind of get out of our own way and feel this interconnection between all life, and we realize that deep joy is there and not in our own wants and desires and everything. So the yoga of nature is like getting out and feeling small. Now, I started a movement years ago called Hammock Enlightenment. And the whole thing I want people to realize is that in the process of feeling small, of getting out under a tree, the cool thing about a hammock is you can't do it in your living room. You got to put it under trees. And when you look up under a tree, this is what the Buddha does. He just looked up under a tree and breathed until he got it. And in that process, you will realize that, I heard a rabbi say it like this. He said, what would happen if we stopped pursuing happiness and just slowed down enough for it to catch up? Right? So when we sit under a hammock and look up under a tree and breathe, we realize that all the happiness and all the love and all the joy we ever wanted is right inside of us, and searching for it is ridiculous. We did this the other day in class, but here's another experiment. Reach your right finger up. This is a little Alan Watts wisdom. Reach your right finger up. Now, touch your right finger with your right finger. And you're like, fuck, I'm still high on mushrooms from the MC Yogi concert, man. Don't make me do this. But can you touch your right finger with your right finger? No. Can you bite your own teeth? No. Can you find love? No, you do not have to search for it. We are love, and all we have to do is diminish our egos, and we will feel this. And this is what happens when we get outside in nature and feel small. So our work as yogis is to do three things, I think. One, the best thing we can do is to get out in nature and get really quiet and do it in solitude. Especially after Wanderlust. Wanderlust is such an amazing time. I mean, every 2 weeks I'm on this circus, and it always blows me away how good it is every single time. But sometimes it leaves me a little overdrawn at the fun bank. And so, Karina's laughing. Maybe overdrawn at a few different banks, actually, but but the point is that you need to ground and get out in nature to reestablish it, and that's what we got to do in our yoga practices, to really feel like, great, it is awesome to meditate in a meditation studio. At the end of your yoga class, awesome to meditate, but the best thing we need to do is get quiet out in nature. Now, do we all have access to Whistler Mountain at all times in our life, or Yosemite Park, or some park somewhere in the middle of nowhere? No. So the second best thing we can do is, even in the cities where we live, and I talk to a lot of media about this, and like, how do you find nature in a city? And when I talk to them, they light up, because there's this term, I don't know if you know about it, it's called nature deficit disorder. Have you heard of this? And when I talk to them, they're like, oh my God, I'm a health editor for XYZ magazine, and I've been teaching everyone about green smoothies and everything, but I haven't sat under a tree, and this light bulb goes off. And so even in their cities, they're like, oh wow, this is lack inside of me means everything. I got caught in the same trap. See, Karina was mentioning this. I moved to Venice, California a few years ago. And I did yoga every day. I taught a studio called Exhale, where many of the teachers here at Wanderlust teach. Great yoga instructors. Every day I did like whatever world-class yoga is, I did that. I ate organic food every day. And if you don't believe me, again, I'll show you my visa bill. I don't know if you've ever been to Venice, but it's freaking crazy. It's like, you just go to buy a smoothie and you're like, $22, right? And they're like, oh, would you like ginseng and bee pollen and all that stuff? Oh, $27, sure. Do you take credit cards? And it just seems normal after a while. And then at the end of the month, you're like, oh God, what have I done? Anyhow, I ate only food like that. You know I'm in Canada now, so I can talk about this. You know the song, The Needle and the Damage Done? Anyway, after a month in Venice, I changed the words to The Visa and the Damage Done. And the whole point, it was all organic food eating. So here I was eating all organic food, doing amazing yoga daily, 2 classes often a day. But still, even though I had a lot of nature around me, I was on the beach every day, but the beaches were like manicured, like they're kind of zambonied with sand. And I never had that like alone feeling in nature. And I was so lucky because being from Canada, the weather got really cold in the winter and no one goes outside. And so we drove north of Malibu and there was barely anyone on the beach, except for, Malibu being Malibu, a few women in leopard skin coats and big sunglasses. And I went out and stood by the ocean. I just looked out there, and I don't know if you've ever had this feeling where you've been lacking nature, but I basically realized what nature deficit disorder really is. Even though I had a lot of nature, I didn't have quiet solitude in nature, and I just looked out into the open horizon. I said, thank you, ocean. Thank you, nature. Thank you for teaching me that I'm not my problems. I'm not the 4 walls that I keep myself in all the time, but I am this openness, I am this vastness deep in my soul, and even though I don't know what it is, this is who I am. And so this is what I'm saying, as yoga instructors, we have to, or in the yoga movement, or even if you're not even a yogi, if you're a meditator or just a conscious human being, our work is to get people out into the forests and the oceans and get quiet and still. And then like I mentioned, in the cities, even if you're in a hotel room in New York City, go in front of the glass. I do this sometimes and just look up at the sky. The editors of these magazines, when I talk about nature, they're like, how do you get nature? I'm like, look up. Look up. The sky is always there, and the sky is so damn beautiful. And I became a member of something called the Cloud Appreciation Society a few years ago. Guess where they're from, of course? London, England. Definitely not San Diego. They are from London. And there's so much beauty up in the sky all the time. And every spiritual tradition talks about being enlightened or the experience of God like light. And I listened on NPR once to this taxi driver, and he was being interviewed, and he was talking about his favorite fares. And he said, my favorite fare was this woman, and she was blind. And I asked her, if you could see anything, what would you want to see? And she said, I would love to see clouds. Because I can't really imagine them, but in my mind, I visualize them like God's thoughts. So even in the city, you're underneath God's thoughts all the time. Open up to it. And I have taught yoga in so many places around the world, and I get sad when I see people going to yoga on a subway, going into a yoga studio, and a lot of yoga studios, not all, but a lot of them are like libraries, so they're not really into community or connection, and they leave, and the message is, do tree pose, get your legs behind your head, detoxify, you will be healthy, and you will. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, why only take one piece of the puzzle? The other piece is like this connection to nature, and so I'm just begging all of us to really encourage everyone to get out there. I had a conversation with Sean yesterday when we left here. Do you know, and David Suzuki here in Canada talks to this, if you're from Canada, you know him. He was talking on his radio show about there's buildings in the projects in Chicago, all architecturally the same. But some of them have not a forest, but a few trees out front. And the crime rate is something like 20% lower in each one of those buildings with trees out front. Why? What do trees do to our spirit? Why is it that in hospital rooms, statistically, there's no question about this, that when you have a view out into nature, we heal better? There's no question about this. There's tons of data about this. Why is that? It's because nature is the most healing force. It makes us feel whole. And the word whole really means health. I don't know if you know this, but health and whole, I heard Deepak Chopra say this once, right? Health and whole is the same thing. To be healthy is to be made whole. And so when you get quiet or connected to nature somehow, even though we feel smaller, we feel more whole, more part of the whole. And that is, I think, the most healing thing in the world. And like I say, it opens us up to love. So the whole topic of this talk is about love is the ultimate renewable resource. And I'm trying to actually draw a line between like what love really is and how it's connected to nature, how we open up to more love. Oh, what I want to tell you too is the third option, by the way, before I go there. So one, just to backtrack a second, one is to go outside somewhere beautiful in nature, seek solitude, best option. Second is to find something beautiful in nature, even if you're not alone, even in a central park. Third is even if you are in that yoga class, 2 floors under the ground on carpet, to psychologically open up and realize, and in our hearts to recognize our deep, deep, deep connection to nature. Like even in a hotel room in Toronto or Iowa or somewhere far from the ocean, every second breath comes from plankton out in the ocean. We're so intimately connected with life. To really recognize the gift and that is under our noses all day when we're breathing is a great way. Hot yoga people. Any hot yoga people out there? Yeah, okay. You guys who like to sweat your asses off. Okay, when you're sweating your asses off in your yoga practice, sometimes we do this. Like just take your right forearm into your mouth and taste it. And that salt is like salt from the ocean. Every drop of sweat, every tear comes and goes from the ocean. So the third best thing we can do is to really practice interconnection with nature as often as possible, wherever we are, even if it's some sterile yoga conference room somewhere. Now I was saying, what is the connection between love and this ultimate renewable resource idea in nature? And I said when we're outside in nature, we feel super small and open up to something beautiful. And I thought I would take a second and kind of talk about this what is love question. At least a couple years ago, do you know this was the most Googled question in America? And if you look it up on YouTube, do you know what comes up? Black-eyed peas. And second, well, this is a little while ago, I looked it up, but it might have changed now. Second is white snake. Anyway, it's a question we're trying to ask all the time, what is love? And I'm trying to answer that question also, and I can't really answer it exactly, but I know one thing for certain is that when we have love in our beings, the importance of our own selves switches. So if there's our own selves and our connection to another, the more love we have, the more this tips the balance. So normally we're up here thinking about our own problems, our own preoccupations. We've kept ourselves in this little box. And then the more love you have, the more it tips the balance. So someone else becomes more important. And you don't really fully understand this. I didn't anyway until I was a parent. And then you know what it's like to say, yes, I would catch a bullet for someone. And that is what love does. It completely tips the scale. Now, for years I've been giving this example of what love is, and it comes from nature. So, in other words, love blurs the line between where we end and another begins, right? And now in San Francisco, a number of years ago, in the mid-2000s, there was some fishermen going back to port. And they saw a whale caught in like 70 crab traps. Now, whales, as you know, can't stay underwater all the time. They need to get their blowholes above the water every, I don't know, someone help me, 15 minutes or something. And what was happening, the crab traps were pulling the whale down. Now, I know they didn't describe it exactly like this, but But really the process was in the back of their minds, the fishermen were saying, we can't live with ourselves if this whale dies. In other words, the line between where this being ends and where we begins was completely blurred, even though it wasn't a member of the same species. And so they went back to port, and they got the divers to come out, the harbor masters, and they came out and they put on their scuba gear. And the harbor masters were there diving, and they were trying to free the whale. But what happens when someone's drowning? They panic, and they try and bring you down with them. And so the whale was kind of doing the same thing. They went to cut the ropes off the whale, and the whale lashed out at them with its pectoral fins. And the divers said literally, it was like a 747 airplane wing coming down like 6 inches from their head. Still, even though one of the things that the yogis are trying to crush is your absolute will for self-preservation. You have to blast through to a consciousness deeper than that. And that's what was happening there, is like this force called love, I'm calling it love, this force that binds even between species, was putting these people at risk in their own life. And they said, actually, we can't live with ourselves unless this animal survives. So they waited for the whale to get tired, and the whale had no choice eventually, once it was tired enough, to trust them. So then the divers could cut the ropes off the whale, and the whale was watching with one eye the whole time, all the divers. And eventually the whale became free, and the divers were like, yes. I don't know what they did, whatever, I'm just gonna say yes. They went, no, hang loose. Whatever divers do when they free whales, I don't know, they did that. And the whale goes swimming back, and these guys are like, yes, swimming back to the boat. And as they're doing this, they see the school bus-sized creature swimming at them. And they're like, ooh. And, the divers say, we don't want to, get too anthropomorphic about this. We can't really describe it. But the whale stopped, and like in Tibet, they touch each other on the forehead. The whale stopped and touched several of the divers on the forehead before it left. Now, all the time when people ask me what love is, I just say, that's it. And all I know is this is what we need more of in life. And when we're on our deathbeds, we will have wanted more of this connection. And it's there all the time. I mean, it's there in big acts. Like I think about soldiers who go back into the line of fire to save other soldiers, like no soldier left behind. And they might not describe that as love, but that's what it is. Where you end and where another person begins is completely blurred. The scale is totally tipped, so much so that self-preservation doesn't mean anything. But even in smaller ways, I'm a parent now, and I feel like every time I push the swing, I'm energetically bringing more love out into the world. And if someone you loved isn't here anymore, you know that the energy of love they brought into the world is still rippling through. The kindness they brought to you is still there when you touch your kids or people in your communities. And this is what really matters. And I swear we get there by getting quiet in nature. It is by getting out in nature that we recognize this whole interconnection of who we really are. And this is our work as yogis, is to get there, is to bind the movement of yoga with nature, and to realize when we get quiet and present, and to really seek solitude out in nature, our deepest heart becomes clear. So this ultimate renewable resource idea is this. Is there any moms out there that are just like with little kids? I know Karina's like definitely in this boat, and like, or who've gone through this, or you've recognized it, you see it in your friends, and they just give so much to their their babies, and it's like, 3 hours of sleep, and the baby cries, and you're like, oh, I don't care. Self-preservation gone. There's this force that comes through. That love is beautiful, but it's draining. That's the problem with love. If love has any shadow side at all, it's that it's draining. It's energy going out. Now, if you're an activist, and I salute you, and the thing you want to do is to help people get on a balance where you're like, you can't just think about your own self, you got to connect to love for the whole. But in the process, sometimes what happens is people get drained, and because they're so drained, they can't connect to the love force anymore. It comes from a place of anger. And the cool thing is, by getting out into the forests and the lakes and the oceans and getting quiet, this is the point I'm trying to make, is that this is energy coming in. And we're taught in yoga that we get this in Shavasana, this energy coming in, and we're taught we get it through meditation. But I'm saying meditate out in the forest. Make sure there's no bears. Like out here, I'm hearing all these bear stories, but make sure there's no bears. And meditate out in the forest, get really quiet. And the Hammock enlightenment movement is simple. The mantra is relax and breathe, observe and receive. So you just relax your nervous system. You get into the parasympathetic nervous system tone. This is what the yogis called sattva. And the cool thing for me is when you get relaxed like this in your nervous system, here it is, if God is love. I was talking about the nervous system one year in Japan. And I said, how do you say nervous system? Because I speak a fair bit of Japanese, but I didn't know that word. And they said, shinkeikei. And I looked at the symbol system for shinkeikei. And I said, doesn't the first kanji, the first symbol, mean God? And they said, yeah. Doesn't the second one mean flow or path? They said, yeah. And isn't this last one a system? They said, yeah. And I'm like, that is my whole theory, that when you relax enough, when you get into a hammock, you open up to this thing called, maybe 100 years ago we would have called it God, but now our modern generation calls it love. And the word in Japanese for nervous system is God flow system. So you open up your God flow system, you relax and breathe. And then you observe something beautiful. And like I said, it can be in your hotel room in New York City, just looking at the clouds. You can be, on Fifth Avenue and just look up and breathe and get quiet. But the whole point is you're not mountain biking. You got to slow down and get that nervous system. You got to get your God flow system open. Relax, breathe, observe something beautiful, and receive. I call it the transmission of the beautiful. To let that beauty light up your heart, to that interconnection, and that's what we're trying to do through Hammock enlightenment. Then it becomes the ultimate renewable resource. So let's fall in love with this planet. Because if we're going to save the planet, you have to fall in love. And I had a conversation, I don't know if you know Waylon Lewis from Elephant Journal. We were talking about this recently on his show. And we're talking about this topic. He said, what's the best thing you can do to save the planet? I'm like, you got to fall in love with it. He's like, that's so cool, because everyone goes to solutions. He said, I was reading La Petite Prince. You know that one? Yeah? I think I said Le Petit Prince. Anyway. That if you want to teach someone to sail, don't teach them to sail, make them fall in love with the ocean. And if we're going to save each other and save the world, we got to fall in love with this planet daily. So we got to get into our hammocks to look up and breathe and find this ultimate renewable resource that connects us all to each other. So I want to show you one final slide. And then maybe we'll open up to a few questions, okay? So just let me tell you a little bit about the slide before you see it. We talk about this topic a lot in our Blissology trainings, okay? We talk about it so much. It is like, nature means everything to me. My whole life mission is to connect people to it and the love force that flows through us in love, in nature. And a girl named Kaylee, posted this on our teacher's training page, and it spoke so much to me. This is not far from here in Snohomish County. There's a picture of a forest ranger, and I think it's a forest ranger getting his last wish fulfilled by a hospice society. And we talk about it all the time, when we try and find our life purpose, like what matters to you on your deathbed? Have you ever done that thing? What matters most to you on your deathbed? And to me, it's like this connection to each other, and it's this connection to the natural world. So go ahead, Karina, show everyone this picture. This is an ex-forest ranger. Before he died, his last wish was to see the forest one last time. So the firemen from where he lived brought him out into the forest in an act of love and kindness. I don't even know if they were being paid. And you can just see the look. I mean, there's so much love in that gesture. And this is where I want our whole yoga and sustainability movement to go, is to fall in love with the planet, to fall in love with each other, to get quiet and open to beauty, and to recognize that love will flow when we do this. And love is this ultimate renewable resource. That's what I got to tell you. That's what I got to tell you. Yeah.